The Senate will come to order. The chaplain will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Eternal God, you are our light and salvation, and we are not afraid. You protect us from danger, so we do not tremble. Mighty God, you are not intimidated by the challenges that confront our nation and world. Lord, inspire our lawmakers with the knowledge of your holiness that will give them reverential awe. Remind them of the many prayers they have prayed that you have already answered. Lord, you have been our help in ages past. You are our hope for the years to come. We magnify your holy name. Don't stay far off. Show yourself strong to this generation and fill us with your peace. We pray in your powerful name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read the communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., December 19th, 2019. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Tom Tillis, a senator from the state of North Carolina, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Chuck Grassley, President pro tempore.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of the House message to accompany H.R. 1865, which the clerk will report.
House message to accompany H.R. 1865, an act to require the Secretary of the Treasury to mint a coin and so forth and for other purposes.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Last night, House Democrats finally did what they had decided to do a long time ago. They voted to impeach President Trump. Over the last 12 weeks, House Democrats have conducted the most rushed, least thorough, and most unfair impeachment inquiry in modern history. Now, their slapdash process has concluded in the first purely partisan presidential impeachment since the wake of the Civil War. The opposition to impeachment was bipartisan. Only one part of one faction wanted this outcome. The House's conduct risks deeply damaging the institutions of American government. This particular House of Representatives has let its partisan rage at this particular president create a toxic new precedent that will echo well into the future. That's what I want to discuss right now. The historic degree to which House Democrats have failed to do their duty and what it will mean for the Senate to do ours. So let's start at the beginning. Let's start with the fact that Washington Democrats made up their minds to impeach President Trump since before he was even inaugurated. Here's a reporter in April of 2016. Donald Trump isn't even the Republican nominee yet, but impeachment is already on the lips of pundits, newspaper editorials, constitutional scholars, and even a few members of Congress. April 2016. On Inauguration Day, 2017, the headline in the Washington Post, "The campaign to impeach President Trump has begun." That was day one. In April 2017, 3 months into the presidency, a senior House Democrat said, "I'm going to fight every day until he's impeached." That was 3 months into the administration. In December 2017, 2 years ago, Congressman Jerry Nadler was openly campaigning to be the ranking member on the House Judiciary Committee, specifically because he was an expert on impeachment. That's the Nadler's campaign to be the top Democrat on judiciary. This week wasn't even the first time House Democrats have introduced articles of impeachment. It was actually the 7th time. They started less than 6 months after the president was sworn in. They tried to impeach President Trump for being impolite to the press, for being mean to professional athletes, for changing President Obama's policy on transgender people in the military. All of these things were high crimes and misdemeanors, according to Democrats. Now, this wasn't just a few people. Scores of Democrats voted to move forward with impeachment on 3 of those prior occasions. So let's be clear. The House's vote yesterday was not some neutral judgment that Democrats came to with great reluctance. It was the predetermined end of a partisan crusade that began before President Trump was even nominated, let alone sworn in. For the very first time in modern history, we've seen a political faction in Congress promise from the moment a president election ended, that they would find some way to overturn it. A few months ago, Democrats' 3-year-long impeachment in search of articles found its way to the subject of Ukraine. House Democrats embarked on the most rushed, least thorough, and most unfair impeachment inquiry in modern history. Chairman Schiff's inquiry was poisoned by partisanship from the outset. Its procedures and parameters were unfair in unprecedented ways. Democrats tried to make Chairman Schiff into a de facto special prosecutor, notwithstanding the fact that he is a partisan member of Congress who'd already engaged in strange and biased behavior. He scrapped precedent to cut the Republican minority out of the process. He denied President Trump the same sorts of procedural rights that houses of both parties had provided to past presidents of both parties. President Trump's counsel could not participate in Chairman Schiff's hearings, present evidence, or cross-examine witnesses. The House Judiciary Committee's crack at this was even more ahistorical. It was like the Speaker called up Chairman Nadler and ordered one impeachment. Rush delivered, please. The committee found no facts on its own, did nothing to verify the Schiff report. Their only witnesses were liberal law professors and congressional staffers. So, Mr. President, there's a reason the impeachment inquiry that led to President Nixon's resignation required about 14 months of hearings, 14 months, in addition to a special prosecutor's investigation. With President Clinton, the independent counsel's inquiry had been underway literally for years before the House Judiciary Committee actually dug in. Mountains of evidence, mountains of testimony from firsthand fact witnesses, serious legal battles to get what was necessary. This time around, House Democrats skipped all of that, spent just 12 weeks. 12 weeks. More than a year of hearings for Nixon, multiple years of investigation for Clinton, and they've impeached President Trump in 12 weeks. 12 weeks. So let's talk about what the House actually produced in those 12 weeks. House Democrats' rushed and rigged inquiry yielded two articles, of impeachment. They are fundamentally unlike any articles that any prior House of Representatives has ever passed. The first article concerns the core events which House Democrats claim are impeachable. The timing of aid to Ukraine. But it does not even purport to allege any actual crime. Instead, they deploy the vague phrase, abuse of power, to impugn the president's action in a general, indeterminate way. Speaker Pelosi's House just gave in to a temptation that every other House in history has managed to resist. Let me say that again. Speaker Pelosi's House just gave in to a temptation that every other House in our history has managed to resist. They impeach a president whom they do not even allege has committed an actual crime known to our laws. They've impeached simply because they disagree with a presidential act and question the motive behind it. So let's look at history. Andrew Johnson impeachment involved around a clear violation of a criminal statute, albeit an unconstitutional statute. Nixon had obstruction of justice, a felony under our laws. Clinton had perjury, also a felony. Now, the Constitution does not say the House can impeach only those presidents who violate a law, but history matters. History matters, and precedent matters. And there were important reasons why every previous House of Representatives in American history restrained itself from crossing this Rubicon. The framers of our Constitution very specifically discussed this issue, whether the House should be able to impeach presidents just for, quote, maladministration. Just for maladministration. In other words, because the House simply thought the president had bad judgment or was doing a bad job. They talked about all this when they wrote the Constitution. The written records of our founders' debates show they specifically rejected this. They realized it would create a total dysfunction to set the bar for impeachment that low. That low. James Madison himself explained that allowing impeachment on that basis would mean the president serves at the pleasure of the Congress instead of the pleasure of the American people. It would make the president a creature of Congress, not the head of a separate and equal branch. So there were powerful reasons, Mr. President, why Congress after Congress for 230 years, required presidential impeachment to revolve around clear, recognizable crimes, even though that was not a strict limitation. Powerful reasons why for 230 years, no House opened the Pandora's box of subjective political impeachments. That 230-year tradition died last night. Now, Mr. President, House Democrats have tried to say they had to impeach President Trump on this historically thin and subjective basis because the White House challenged their request for more witnesses. And that brings us to the second article of impeachment. The House titled this one, Obstruction of Congress. What it really does is impeach the president for asserting presidential privilege. The concept of executive privilege is another 2-century-old constitutional tradition. Presidents, starting with George Washington, have invoked it. Federal courts have repeatedly affirmed it is a legitimate constitutional power. House Democrats requested extraordinary amounts of sensitive information from President Trump's White House, exactly the kinds of things over which presidents of both parties have asserted privilege in the past. Predictably and appropriately, President Trump did not simply roll over. He defended the constitutional authority of his office. No surprise there. It's not a constitutional crisis for a House to want more information than a president wants to give up. That's not a constitutional crisis. It's a routine occurrence. The separation of powers is messy by design. Here's what should have happened. Here's what should have happened. Either the president and Congress negotiate a settlement, or the third branch of government, the judiciary, addresses the dispute between the other two. The Nixon impeachment featured disagreements over presidential privilege. So they went to court. The Clinton impeachment featured disagreements over presidential privilege. So they went to the courts. This takes time. It's inconvenient. That's actually the point. Due process is not meant to maximize the convenience of the prosecutor. It's meant to protect the accused. But this time was different. Remember, 14 months of hearings for Richard Nixon, years of investigation for Bill Clinton, 12 weeks for Donald Trump. Democrats didn't have to rush this, but they chose to stick to their political timetable at the expense of pursuing more evidence through proper legal channels. Nobody made Chairman Schiff do this. He chose to. The Tuesday before last on live television, Adam Schiff explained to the entire country that if House Democrats had let the justice system follow its normal course, they might not have gotten to impeach the president in time for the election. My goodness. In Nixon, the courts were allowed to do their work. In Clinton, the courts were allowed to do their work. Only these House Democrats decided due process is too much work. They'd rather impeach with no proof. Well, Mr. President, they tried to cover for their own partisan impatience by pretending that the routine occurrence of a president exerting constitutional privilege is itself a second impeachable offense. The following is something that Adam Schiff literally said in early October. Here's what he said. Any action that forces us to litigate or to have to consider litigation will be considered further evidence of obstruction of justice. That's Adam Schiff. Here's what the chairman effectively said and what one of his committee members restated just this week. If the president asserts his constitutional rights, it's that much more evidence he's guilty. If the president asserts his constitutional rights, it's that much more evidence he's guilty. That kind of bullying is antithetical to American justice. So those are House Democrats' 2 articles of impeachment. That's all their rushed and rigged inquiry could generate. An act that the House does not even allege is criminal, and a nonsensical claim that exercising a legitimate presidential power is somehow an impeachable offense. Mr. President, this is by far the thinnest basis for any House-passed presidential impeachment in American history. The thinnest and the weakest, and nothing else even comes close. And candidly, I don't think I'm the only person around here who realizes that. Even before the House voted yesterday, Democrats had already started to signal uneasiness with its end product. Before the articles even passed, the Senate Democratic leader went on television to demand that this body redo House Democrats' homework for them, that the Senate should supplement Chairman Schiff's sloppy work so it is more persuasive than Chairman Schiff himself bothered to make it. Of course, every such demand simply confirms that House Democrats have rushed forward with a case that is much too weak. Back in June, Speaker Pelosi promised the House would build an ironclad case. Never mind that she was basically promising impeachment months before the Ukraine events, but that's a separate matter. She promised an ironclad case. And in March, Speaker Pelosi said this, impeachment is so divisive to the country that unless there is something so compelling and overwhelming and bipartisan, I don't think we should go down that path because it divides the country. End quote. By the Speaker's own standards, the standards she set, she has failed the country. The case is not compelling, not overwhelming, and as a result, not bipartisan. The failure was made clear to everyone earlier this week when Senator Schumer began searching for ways the Senate could step out of our proper role and try to fix the House Democrats' failures for them. And it was made even more clear last night when Speaker Pelosi suggested that House Democrats may be too afraid too afraid to even transmit their shoddy work product to the Senate. Mr. President, it looks like the prosecutors are getting cold feet in front of the entire country and second-guessing whether they even want to go to trial. They said impeachment was so urgent that it could not even wait for due process, but now they're content to sit on their hands. This is really comical. Democrats' own actions concede that their allegations are unproven. The articles aren't just unproven, they're also constitutionally incoherent. Incoherent. Frankly, if either of these articles is blessed by the Senate, we could easily see the impeachment of every future president of either party. Let me say that again. If the Senate blesses this historically low bar, we will invite the impeachment of every future president. The House Democrats' allegations, as presented, are incompatible with our constitutional order. They're unlike anything that has ever been seen in 230 years of this republic. House Democrats want to create new rules for this president because they feel uniquely enraged. They feel uniquely enraged. But long after the partisan fever of this moment has broken, the institutional damage will remain. I've described the threat to the presidency. This also imperils the Senate itself. The House has created an unfair, unfinished product that looks nothing like any impeachment inquiry in American history. And if the Speaker ever gets her House in order, that mess will be dumped over here on the Senate's lap. If the Senate blesses this slapdash impeachment, if we say that from now on, this is enough, then we invite an endless parade of impeachable trials. Future Houses of either party will feel free to toss up a jump ball every time they feel angry, free to swamp the Senate with trial after trial, no matter how baseless the charges. We'd be giving future Houses of either party unbelievable new power to paralyze the Senate at their whim. More thin arguments, more incomplete evidence, more partisan impeachments. In fact, Mr. President, this same House of Representatives has already indicated that they themselves may not be finished impeaching. The House Judiciary Committee told a federal court this very week that it will continue its impeachment investigation even after voting on these articles. And multiple Democratic members have already called publicly for more. If the Senate blesses this, if the nation accepts this, presidential impeachments may cease being a once-in-a-generation event and become a constant part of the political background noise. This extraordinary tool of last resort may become just another part of the arms race of polarization. Real statesmen would have recognized, no matter their view of this president, that trying to remove him on this thin and partisan basis could unsettle the foundations of our republic. Real statesmen would have recognized, no matter how much partisan animosity might be coursing through their veins, that cheapening the impeachment process was not the answer. Historians will regard this as a great irony of our era, that so many who profess such concern for our norms and traditions themselves proved willing to trample our constitutional order to get their way. It is long past time for Washington to get a little perspective. President Trump is not the first president with a populist streak, not the first to make entrenched elites uncomfortable. He's certainly not the first president to speak bluntly, to mistrust the administrative state, or to rankle unelected bureaucrats. And heaven knows he's not the first president to assert the constitutional privileges of his office rather than roll over when Congress demands unlimited, sensitive information. None of these things, none of them, is unprecedented. I'll tell you what would be unprecedented. It will be an unprecedented constitutional crisis if the Senate literally hands the House of Representatives a new partisan vote of no confidence that the founders intentionally withheld, destroying the independence of the presidency. It will be unprecedented if we agree that any future House that dislikes any future president can rush through an unfair inquiry, skip the legal system, and paralyze the Senate with a trial. The House could do that at will under this precedent. It will be unprecedented if the Senate says second-hand and third-hand testimony from unelected civil service servants is enough to overturn the people's vote. It will be an unprecedented constitutional crisis if the Senate agrees to set the bar this low forever. It is clear what this moment requires. It requires the Senate to fulfill our founding purpose. The framers built the Senate to provide stability, to take the long view of our republic, to safeguard institutions from the momentary hysteria that sometimes consumes our politics, to keep partisan passions from literally boiling over. The Senate exists for moments like this. That's why this body has the ultimate say in impeachments. The framers knew the House would be too vulnerable to transient passions and violent factionalism. They needed a body that would consider legal questions about what has been proven and political questions about what the common good of our nation requires. Hamilton said explicitly in Federalist 65 that impeachment involves not just legal questions, but inherently political judgments about what outcome best serves the nation. The House can't do both. The courts can't do both. This is as grave an assignment as the Constitution gives to any branch of government, and the framers knew only the Senate could handle it. Well, the moment the framers feared has arrived. A political faction in the lower chamber have succumbed to partisan rage. A political faction in the House of Representatives has succumbed to a partisan rage. They have fulfilled Hamilton's philosophy that impeachment will, quote, connect itself with the pre-existing factions, enlist all their animosities, and there will always be the greatest danger that the decision will be regulated more by the comparative strength of parties than by the real demonstrations of innocence or guilt. Alexander Hamilton. That's what happened in the House last night. The vote did not reflect what had been proven. It only reflects how they feel about the president. The Senate must put this right. We must rise to the occasion. There's only one outcome that is suited to the paucity of evidence, the failed inquiry, the slapdash case. Only one outcome suited to the fact that the accusations themselves are constitutionally incoherent. Constitutionally incoherent. Only one outcome will preserve core precedents rather than smash them into bits in a fit of partisan rage because one party still cannot accept the American people's choice in 2016. It could not be clearer which outcome would serve the stabilizing, institution-preserving, fever-breaking role for which the United States Senate was created, and which outcome would betray it. The Senate's duty is clear. The Senate's duty is clear. When the time comes, we must fulfill it. Now, Mr. President, I understand there are 3 bills at the desk due a second reading in block.
The clerk will read the titles of the bill for the second time on block.
H.R. 397, an act to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986, and so forth, and for other purposes. H.R. 1759, an act to amend Title III of the Social Security Act, and so forth, and for other purposes. H.R. 4018, an act to provide that the amount of time that an elderly offender must serve before being eligible for placement in home detention is to be reduced by the amount of good time credits earned by the prisoner, and for other purposes.
In order to place the bills on the calendar under the provisions of Rule 14, I would object to further proceedings in block.
Objection having been heard, the bills will be placed on calendar on block. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. Mr. President.
The Democratic
Are we in
leader.
a quorum, Mr. President? I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Now, Mr. President, last night, the House of Representatives voted to impeach President Donald Trump. It is only the third time in our nation's history that the President of the United States has been impeached. The articles of impeachment charge that President Trump abused the powers of his office by soliciting the interference of a foreign power in our elections, not for the good of the country, but to benefit himself personally. The articles also charge that the President obstructed Congress in the investigation of those matters. Together, these articles suggest the President committed a grave injury to our grand democracy. The conduct they describe is very much what the founders feared when they forged the impeachment powers of the Congress. The founders, in their wisdom, gave the House the power to accuse, the Senate the power to judge. We are now asked to fulfill our constitutional role as a court of impeachment. Now that the House of Representatives has impeached President Trump, the nation turns its eyes to the Senate. What will the nation see? Will the nation see what Alexander Hamilton saw? A body of government with confidence enough to preserve, unawed and uninfluenced, the necessary impartiality? Or will the nation see the Senate dragged into the depths of partisan fervor? The nation just witnessed how the Republican leader sees his role in this chapter of our history, demonstrating both an unfortunate descent into partisanship and demonstrating the fundamental weakness of the president's defense. Leader McConnell claimed that the impeachment of President Trump is illegitimate because the House voted along party lines. Forgive me, but House Democrats cannot be held responsible for the cravenness of the House Republican caucus and their blind fealty to the president. Leader McConnell claimed the impeachment was motivated by partisan rage. This from the man who said proudly, "I am not impartial. I have no intention to be impartial at all in the trial of President Trump." What hypocrisy. Leader McConnell accused the House Democrats of an obsession to get rid of President Trump. This from the man who proudly declared his #1 goal was to make President Obama a one-term president. Leader McConnell claimed that Democrats impeached the president for asserting executive privilege. President Trump never formally claimed executive privilege. He claimed, quote, "absolute immunity," unquote. And the White House counsel wrote a letter stating simply that the administration would not comply with any subpoenas. Leader McConnell claimed that the Democrats' quote, "obsession with impeachment has prevented the House from pursuing legislation to help the American people." Leader McConnell knows very, very well that the House Democratic majority has passed hundreds, literally hundreds of bills that gathered dust here in the Senate, condemned to a legislative graveyard by none other than Leader McConnell himself, who proudly called himself the Grim Reaper. Members of the Senate, members of the 116th Senate have been denied the opportunity to legislate by Leader McConnell. We aren't even allowed to debate the issues that would impact the American people: health care, infrastructure, prescription drugs. We could have spent the year debating these issues. We weren't doing impeachment. Leader McConnell has chosen not to focus on these issues and to put none of these bills on the floor. And as he reminds us often, he alone decides what goes on the floor. Leader McConnell claimed that the House did not afford the president due process. The leader knows well that President Trump refused to participate in the process, despite invitation, and blocked witnesses and documents from Congress in unprecedented fashion. Leader McConnell claimed that the House ran, quote, the most rushed, least thorough, and most unfair impeachment inquiry in modern history. I know that that's the Republican talking point, but here's the reality. Leader McConnell is plotting the most rushed, least thorough, and most unfair impeachment trial in modern history. His plan to prevent House managers from calling witnesses to prove their case is a dramatic break from precedent. We heard a lot about precedent from the leader. Never has there been a presidential impeachment trial in which the majority prevented the House managers from fairly presenting their case, to have witnesses explain their knowledge of the alleged malfeasance. Will Leader McConnell, breaking precedent, strong-arm his caucus into making this the first Senate impeachment trial of a president in history that heard no witnesses? We ask, is the president's case so weak that none of the president's men can defend him under oath? Is the president's case so weak that none of the president's men can defend him under oath? If the House case is so weak, why is Leader McConnell so afraid of witnesses and documents? We believe the House case is strong, very strong. But if the Republican leader believes it's so weak, why is he so afraid of relevant witnesses and documents, which will not prolong things very long? In our proposal, 4 hours for each witness. It is true, as the leader has said, that the framers built the Senate to provide stability and to keep partisan passions from boiling over. However, their vision of the Senate is a far cry from the partisan body Senator McConnell has created. I hope America was watching the Republican leader deliver his speech. I truly do, because most glaring of all was the fact that Leader McConnell's 30-minute partisan stem-winder contained hardly a single defense of the President of the United States on the merits. Almost none defended President Trump, because they can't. In the wake of an enormous amount of evidence uncovered by House investigators, much of it in the form of testimony by top Trump officials, whom the administration tried to silence, the Republican leader could not rebut the accusations against the president with facts. The Republican leader complained about the process. The Republican leader made many partisan and inflammatory accusations about Democrats, but he did not advance an argument in defense of the president's conduct on the merits. That, in and of itself, is a damning reflection of the state of the president's defense. Our goal in the Senate, above all, should be to conduct a fair and speedy trial. I have proposed a very reasonable structure that would do just that. 4 witnesses, only those with direct knowledge of the charges made by the House, only those who could provide new, relevant, and potentially illuminating testimony. Strict time limits on each stage of the process to prevent the trial from dragging out too long. It's eminently reasonable. It's eminently fair. A group who had no partisan bias would come up with this type of proposal. I have yet to hear one good argument why less evidence is better than more evidence, particularly in such a serious moment as impeachment of the President of the United States. In Leader McConnell's 30-minute screed, he did not make one argument why the witness and documents should not be part of the trial. President Trump protests that he did not receive due process in the House impeachment inquiry. Due process is the ability to respond to charges made against you and present your side of the case. The President was invited to provide witnesses and provide documents at every stage of the process. He chose not to. Still, Democrats are offering the President due process again here in the Senate. The witnesses we suggest are top Trump-appointed officials. They aren't Democrats. We don't know if their testimony would exculpate the President or incriminate him, but their testimony should be heard. If the President's counsel wants to call other witnesses with direct knowledge of why the aid to Ukraine was delayed, we say they should be able to do so. President Trump claims he wants due process. I suspect he would rather hide or name call, because if he really wanted due process, he could get it easily. One phone call to Leader McConnell telling him to let his aides testify. One phone call to his chief of staff telling him to release the documents to Congress. Both of these actions would let the truth come out. I ask again, can none of the President's men come defend him under oath? To my Republican colleagues, our message is a simple one. Democrats want a fair trial that examines the relevant facts. We want a fair trial. The message from Leader McConnell at the moment is that he has no intention of conducting a fair trial, no intention of acting impartially, no intention of getting the facts. Despite our disagreements, I will meet with Leader McConnell soon to discuss the rules. But each senator will influence whether the Senate lives up to its constitutional duty to serve as an impartial court of impeachment. In the coming weeks, Republican senators will face a choice. Each Republican senator will face a choice. Do they want a fair trial, or do they want to allow the President free rein? Each senator must ask him or herself, do you want a fair trial, or do you want the President to do whatever he wants, regardless of rule of law, regardless of the consequences to this great nation? The nation turns its eyes to the Senate. What will it see? The President of the United States has spent the past several months telling Congress it has no right to oversight, no right to investigate any of his activities, that he has absolute immunity, that Article 2 of the Constitution gives him, quote, the right to do whatever he wants, unquote. That's the President's words. Past Senates have disagreed with such views and strongly and proudly stood up for the notion that the President is not omnipotent. Democrats have done it. Republicans have done it. And often to presidents of their own party. The Senate has said in the past that the President serves the people, not himself, that he is not a king. Will it do so again, or will it shirk from that responsibility? If the Republicans proceed with the majority leader's scheme to sweep these charges under the rug and permit the President to ignore Congress, they will be creating a new precedent that will long be remembered as one of the Senate's darkest chapters. It will be remembered as a time when a simple majority in the Senate sought to grant two new rights to the President: the right to use the government for personal purposes and the right to ignore Congress at his pleasure. Here, I agree with Senator McConnell. Moments like this are why the Senate exists. If the President commits high crimes and misdemeanors, and the Congress can do nothing about it, not even conduct a fair tribunal where his conduct is judged, by dispassionate representatives of the people, then the president can commit those crimes with impunity. This president can, others can. I have little doubt that if we tell the president that he can escape scrutiny in this instance, he will do it again and again and again. Future presidents will take note and may do worse. And the most powerful check on the executive, the one designed to protect the people from tyranny, will be erased. This chapter in our history books could be a lesson about the erosion of checks and balances in our modern age, or it could be a proud reaffirmation of those founding principles. This chapter in our history books could be about the overpowering partisanship of our times, or it could be about the Senate's capacity to overcome it. Again, moments like this are why the United States Senate exists. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Utah.
It's December, Mr. President. And so America's attention turns once again
Good. Focuses. All right.
I just like to sit here for now and decide what the Well, I didn't bring the sticks because I didn't really know what I was going to do, Gigi. So, I mean, sure, I'll do something else to do it back. I mean, the building doesn't change from yesterday. The sky's exactly the same. The sky's exactly the same. Doing some beautiful stuff yesterday. Cool, do it. Oh, I'll make the most of it. No, I'm going to be sick. Maybe 8.
Do you need me?
No, honestly, don't worry. It's going to be fine. I've got the monopod and I've got the stabilizers. I've got the floor. Floor works a treat.
Yeah. On your knees. Cool.
Lie down on the floor.
See you back then.
Alright, see you back then.
Do you like your boots? Thank you. They're only comfortable if you wear super thick socks. Like that. Yeah. It's like, on the one hand, inconvenient, but on the other hand, I get to wear perfect socks. That's true. Yeah, you just need the extra layer of protection there. Get that.
Right. Oh, I like that. You should. That is one built perfectly for today. Yes, you can. No. Your beast doesn't need more than 5 minutes. It's a newspaper. You think that? I know it. It's not for me up there, mister.
Hey, how you doing?
Prefer a
stick is fine.
Okay, stick's fine.
Yes, sir. No, a little higher. A little higher. No. And you know, if she's late, we'll do another at the top of 11. Yes, correct. Not that she would ever be late, but just. Okay, just give me a sec, Sal.
Thank you. Sal with Derek from Studio A. Yeah, the house. Pelosi. Yeah. Yes. Well, coming from Studio A, Capitol Hill. No, this is 4 p.m. I'm just checking in. Yeah, Hey, Sal with Gare for the possible. You up? Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
That's perfect.
No. This is close.
I appreciate that. Hey, Gary, literally. Hey, Gary. Yeah. Give me a white balance. White balance.
Ayer sí, bastante ocupado.
Sí, ¿verdad?
¿Y cómo estás? El otro día te vi trabajando y...
¿Y a qué fuiste por allá?
fui a entregarles el ID del Brooklyn. Creo que lo necesitaba en arte. Entonces me entregar a Verónica, ¿es?
Sí, Verónica.
Ya la entregué. Oye, tienen un estudio...
Sí, es bien grande. La próxima vez, si quieres, hacemos te doy una bolsecita. Avísame cuando vayas ahí. Mira, Elena se va a...
So, they were taking your camera as a bump shot, so...
Okay, thank you.
Stay on the bump shot and I'll get in it when they ask me. Garrett, behind the podium. And several people text me, like, you don't get the box for bump shots. So we just start to do Panama.
Hey, Danny, do me a favor. Stand over here.
Are you on the field? You are, sorry.
RT Español es más activo que tienen una productora y la productora la que
No, pero
te mando un correo hoy al llegar. Sale enlace como
Hey Gary, you got to call in. Can you give me a voice test up there? Yeah. Somebody give me a voice test.
Anyway, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
no, I'm not.
No, he's just setting it up to make sure he's They'll be good to go after the press conference.
Oh, you don't like it then?
It's too nice. I'll be concentrating on that thing.
Do a rack focus.
Hey, Diane, it's Manny. Is Kevin around?
No, I'm gonna lower it. We have 2 seats.
Hey, Kev. Do you have an IFB number for me?
It was a late night. It's like, yeah, it doesn't matter. Do you have an IFB number for me?
Yeah. Please.
Yeah. Okay, Danny, thank you, bro.
So that's kind of old. Speaker and the minority. But it's always the same staff.
Say it'll be over soon.
More Congress.
Ahora sí, ¿no?
I got something for you, Danny.
Like a scarf and overcoat.
Orientate con salsiccia e broccoli. Oh. Yeah.
Slow down the spores.
What else? Oh, we gotta call in.
I already did.
Okay. What else? Oh, thank you. Also, you know what? You should, what, did I have? What about PL?
Yeah.
PL's gonna have to do it.
Thanks, Kinsey.
You know the number.
You send me the PL number. I don't know.
That's an
Sure. Okay, so you see this, Manny? This is where she's gonna do nothing about it.
Yeah. Wait, in person? That's crazy. But it'll be yeah, it'll be right, it's just like that.
Gary?
I'm a terrible buddy.
With them.
Handheld or
anything? Yeah. Just hold this. Let's do that.
Hey, Diane. Hey, Kev. Yeah, I need that number. So, 597
ABCC next to
597 Mike.
20's a lot.
That's way too much. It's too much.
Yes, I can.
More like it. I was like, what the? Nobody I'm like, I can tell her that this is not normal. Now I gotta way back, and I'm too tired for that. Yeah. Like I have to. I have the bandwidth.
Yellow one? No, not that yellow one. Hey, Kev, the line is busy.
Can't be everything that you need in my footwear world every day. I wore my boots yesterday. They're wore out then. I like to feel like every day. I don't want to be that guy.
Okay, it's 212-599-4650, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try it again.
Are you going home for Christmas? Here. You going home for Christmas?
Saturday.
Well, how long will you be there?
Whole week. Yes.
No, your mom's in Austin. Yeah. Is that where you're going?
Yeah. I'm going to Dallas for like a day. And then
Are you going to? We're going to Dallas. We're going to Dallas on for 4 days. 25th to the 29th.
check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This will sound like that.
Derek.
Go check yours.
Check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
It's all low.
You saw that CBS side? No, CBS side of it fixed part. And then it just
A little more to your left, please.
Talk to me now.
Jared, a little more to your left. Yep. Perfect. Thank you. That's Garrett. That's Garrett's spot.
Yes, sir.
She might be 15. She might be. We could move that over there.
I'll be on the
Nancy Corder's camera, PL on the grid. Put you on.
Yeah. I'll just take that.
Yes, sir. Are we taking Nancy? For sure. Yes, sir. Okay, good. Go where you go. Put you on mute. Thank you. I gotta go to that.
Hold it.
Okay.
I'm not going to be sitting in one place at once. No. Yeah, I know.
Gotta have freedom
I gotta the idea of being stationary freaks me out. That's why I don't use tripod.
I think it's a nice sweater.
You only need one angle.
It's a very nice sweater.
Chris, whichever one of the Chris's. The white.
It's a cable knit skirt. That's why I thought that.
It's basically doing a lot of work there, but.
And you weren't even trying.
Well, Howie, the bottom line is we're in impeachment purgatory at the moment with the articles passed from the House, but no clarity yet on when or if they'll get transmitted to the Senate. This was something that had been discussed on some of the left wing of the party. This is Lawrence Tribe, a Harvard University professor who had been advising Democrats, had been talking about this idea of holding back the articles as a way to try to force a fairer trial in the Senate, to force the Senate to allow for witnesses. And when the Speaker was asked about this last night, she didn't really close the door on anything in terms of whether they would hold back the articles, and if so, for how long. Now, there wasn't any expectation that managers would be marching across the Capitol today to deliver them this afternoon. I think everybody in both chambers and both parties expected this would start in January, but it's got a lot of people talking about whether Democrats would try to press a tactical advantage here by seeing if they can put some pressure on Mitch McConnell and see if public opinion continues to be in favor of getting these witnesses, if that's the kind of thing that could lean on McConnell. Oh, by the way, there's still another big vote in the House today on USMCA. The president's #1 legislative priority this session will likely be the last thing that the House votes on before members go home for the Christmas break. So a little bit of cognitive dissonance here, and really the only person who knows what the plan is going to be for the House is the Speaker, and we're still waiting to hear from her this morning to see if she is any more clear today than she was late last night.
I so hate doing the live audience thing. Here's all of my colleagues who probably know this shit better than me, and if I get out
I'm going to sit in front of your stool just until you come
I think it's going to be for people like us. It's going to be like women in their 20s and like their mom.
That was so funny. That was very
She got
Yes. What else are you going to see at
No, do they? Everybody wants to see that. I gotta have. Because these people don't house me. I mean, they don't talk to you. I've never had a cure.
There we go.
Good morning. How are you? Good, that's good. We've been hearing from people all over the country since last night and this morning. Seems like people have a spring in their steps because the president was held accountable for his reckless behavior. No one is above the law, and the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. No one is above the law, and the president has been held accountable. It really is interesting to see the response that we are getting, bipartisan, across party lines. I myself want to say I have a spring in my step because of the moral courage of our caucus. To see them all, so many of 100 members, go to the floor, that's all that we had time for, to go to the floor and speak about our Constitution, about the facts of the case, so clearly, so patriotically, so prayerfully, and so solemnly, but so definitely. Just to get this off the table right away, we impeached the president immediately. Everybody was on to the next thing. The next thing for us will be when we see the process that is set forth in the Senate, then we'll know the number of managers that we may have to go forward and who we would choose. That's what I said last night. That's what I'm saying now. The precedent for this, and I met with my 6 chairs after some of us were together for a press conference after the votes last night, and we discussed the precedent of it all, and that is in the most recent case taking up an impeachment, there was a proposal on the floor put together in a bipartisan way. 100 senators voted for the process on how they would go forward on the case of President Clinton. We would hope that they could come to some conclusion like that. But in any event, we're ready. When we see what they have, we'll know who and how many we will send over. That's all I'm going to say about that now. We've had a very eventful week. I'm so proud of our members and really in some cases the bipartisanship of some of this and some not. Last year's campaign we said for the people we would lower the cost of health care, starting with lowering the cost of prescription drugs and preserving the pre-existing condition benefit. Within the past week we passed the Elijah Cummings Lower Drug Costs Now Act, which does just that. As we were passing it last week, we discussed the particulars of it. But with the savings that we gained from that, I think it's important to note that we already said we would be spending the hundreds of billions of dollars in savings on expanding benefits for Medicare, dental, visual, hearing, and in the biggest expansion of Medicare since its inception. Next, we did that we did lower an important bipartisan bill, the appropriations bill, to keep government open and to do so early enough so that you knew to make your weekend plans and get started for all the holidays you may be observing. And that was a major accomplishment. It took constant back and forth, but we ended up, as I have always said, as an appropriator myself, one forged in that culture, left to their own devices, the appropriators can get the job done. And I salute Chairwoman Nita Lowey for her work, the ranking member as well, and we're very pleased with that legislation. I guess I'll take up cloture or something on the Senate pretty soon, and hopefully it will be on its way to the President for a signature. Before I leave the subject of impeachment, though, let me commend our sixth chairman, Adam Schiff, Jerry Nadler, Chair of Judiciary, so proud of him, Maxine Waters, Financial Services, Richie Neal, Ways and Means Committee, Elliot Engel, the Foreign Affairs Committee, and also a very important committee chaired now by Carolyn Maloney, the Gov Reform Committee. I said last night and I say today, while he isn't with us today physically here, Elijah Cummings is with us in spirit. The foundation he helped lay for justice is with us. And he said, when we're dancing with the angels, what will we know about what we did to keep the Constitution intact? When he said that, it was very prescient. Little did we know that by the time we passed the impeachment resolution, well, the articles of impeachment, that he would be dancing with the angels. Right now, as we speak, they're debating on the floor the U.S., Mexico, Canada trade agreement. I hear my colleagues on the floor last night saying, well, if we weren't doing this, we could do Mexico. Well, we are doing Mexico. And the discussion that took some time to convince the administration and the other countries was that we weren't going forward until we had the strongest possible enforcement of the trade agreement, and also manifested in the legislation that we'll have on the floor today, the implementing legislation. As you've heard me say over and over again, this is about enforcement, the overarching issue. If you can enforce it, it doesn't matter what you put forth. And of the concerns that we had, one were workers' rights, the other pharmaceuticals, and the other the environment. And we made giant progress from, first of all, over the existing NAFTA for sure. But apart from that, big distance between what the administration was proposing to begin with in all of those areas and to where we ended up now going forward. I'm very pleased to have the statement today that went out from the AFL-CIO, from Richard Trumka. He said, we are proud. He said, there is no denying that the trade rules in America will now be fair. Working people have created a new standard for future trade negotiations. I think it's a template for future trade agreements. Some of my members think, let's not give it that much. But we'll see how it goes in the implementation. That means everything. Then after that, today, we will do SALT. And that is going to be the state and local tax that the Republicans put on to punish blue states largely. It is paid for, this legislation, to repeal the SALT tax, and it will be paid for by increasing the rate on wealthiest individuals in our country. When the president first proposed his tax scam, they were saying, we're never going to lower the individual rate. And then they did. And now we will raise it again to repeal SALT. So we're very proud of what we have done. As you know, the Republicans keep saying, well, we should be working. You know, we've sent over 400 bills, 275 of them sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk. Well, 400, but 275 of those, at least, are bipartisan. The range of subjects is, well, you've heard me say it, but it bears repeating, I think. That includes all of our top 10 pieces of legislation, bipartisan background checks, expanding background checks. People have to have a background check unless they buy it at a gun show, online, or in some kind of straw transaction. So this is not creating background checks, it is expanding them, and as well as the South Carolina, one is H.R. 8, the other 1112. 295 days ago, we sent those bills to Mitch McConnell, the Grim Reaper. I've news for him. He may think they're dead on arrival there, but they are alive and well in the general public, and every day that he does not take up that legislation, because he knows it will pass. He fears that it will pass, or else he'd take it up. Every day that he does not pass it, 100 people die. Not all of them would, by gun violence, not all of them would be saved by the legislation, but some. And so we urge him to take up that life-saving legislation. The list goes on. Paycheck fairness, equal pay for equal work, Violence Against Women Act, again, about women, the legislation to raise the minimum wage of the 30-some million, 32, 33 million people who will get a pay raise with the increase in the minimum wage. Over 20 million of them are women. The Equality Act and Discrimination Against the LGBTQ Community, Dream and Promise Act, the SAFE Act, Save Our Federal Elections Act, Butch-Lewis Act, Protecting Pensions for America's Workers, Farm Workforce Modernization Act, which we passed the other day. It was bipartisan support and has bipartisan support inside and outside the Congress. Again, lower drug costs now. One other bill that we did pass that we had an enrollment ceremony, perhaps some of you came, was the Future Act, and that was about minority serving institutions, Hispanic serving institutions, historically black colleges and universities, higher education institutions that deal with our Native American population. It's very important. We sent it. That did pass, and that is on its way to the president. So with that, I said to my members what I say to you guys all the time. The word recreate and recreate are the same words. They spelled the same, and they mean something the same. When you recreate, renew, rest up, be with your family, you are recreated to come back for the discussions and the debates ahead as we go into the future. And as we go into the future, again, we are inspired by our founders who said, e pluribus unum, from any one, no matter what our difference is, and they certainly had theirs. We always have to remember that we are one country. I have my speaker's pin on today, but many times I have on the flag pin, which said, one country, one destiny. We have to think in those terms, and we look forward to doing that as we go forward. We still have a day here as we go forward. So I wish you happy holidays, and whatever you are celebrating. In our house, we celebrate them all. Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, New Year's, whatever else. But I hope you have it. Now I'll have time for a few questions. Nancy?
Do you run the risk as Do you run the risk, as some Republicans have said, of looking like you're playing games with impeachment if you hold on to these articles for too long?
I said what I was going to say, Nancy. When we bring the bill, which is, just so you know, there's a bill made in order by the Rules Committee that we can call up at any time in order to send it over to the Senate and to have the provisions in there to pay for the impeachment. And then the next step, whatever you want to call it, the trial. That is where you put the managers. I was not prepared to put the managers in that bill yet because we don't know the arena that we are in. Frankly, I don't care what the Republicans say. Any other questions? Not on this subject. I've said this is it. I honored Nancy.
Last night you suggested you need to see a fair process in the Senate.
Well, we'd like to see a fair process, but we'll see what they have, and we'll be ready for whatever it is.
Is that
Yes, Chad?
the requirement? You need to see a fair process before.
We would hope there would be a fair process, just as we hope that they would honor the Constitution. By the way, I saw some of it, I didn't see it, but I heard some of what Mitch McConnell said today, and it reminded me that our founders, and when they wrote the Constitution, they suspected that there could be a rogue president. I don't think they suspected that we could have a rogue president and a rogue leader in the Senate at the same time. Yes,
Speaker, to that end, you have talked and criticized Senator McConnell today.
Any other questions on any of this? Anybody want to talk about Mexico Free Trade Agreement? Anybody care about that? Jobs for the American people, progress in addressing globalism and the issues. Anybody want to talk about the SALT tax that we're passing today, important issues that relate to the economic vitality of our communities? Any other questions? Because I'm not going to answer any more questions on this. Clearly, do you understand? When we see what their process is, we will know who and how many we want to send over. Not until then. I'm not going to go there anymore. Yes, sir.
On USMCA, one expects the president will campaign how he got rid of the worst trade deal in history and made a better deal. Is that something you want to take credit for?
Of course we'll take credit for it, because what he proposed did not fill the bill of what he just described. But there are those, and some of you who care about substance, have in the past asked about whether we would pass that because it would have what we call collateral benefit to the president. I don't care about that. But we had an opportunity to do something very important for the American people, for America's workers, and we could not let him stand in the way of that because he would go out and take credit. So this isn't about him. It's about American workers. It's about being good neighbors in our hemisphere. And frankly, we weren't going to go down that path until the administration conceded on many of the provisions that they had in the original proposal, which were not acceptable and which were not, as you described, the president would describe it. Yes, sir.
Have you had any conversations with Congressman Van Drew about maybe caucusing
None.
within the new year?
Zero.
Do you have any advice for the
No. No. Nothing. Zero.
And Madam Speaker,
One more. That's it. Yes.
The president last night had some pretty harsh comments about your dear friend Debbie Dingell and her late husband. Wondering if you had any reaction.
Let us pray. Let us pray for the president. This is, the president clearly is insecure when it comes to statespersons, whether it was John McCain. Think of what he said about John McCain, and his supporters just overlooked that. John McCain. Now John Dingell. What the president misunderstands is that cruelty is not wit. Just because he gets a laugh for saying the cruel things that he says doesn't mean he's funny. It's not funny at all. It's very sad. Thank you all very much. Happy holidays to all.
you know, then Meadows would leave the House early, and depending on the rules in North Carolina, there would likely be a special election held to fill his seat.
Sullivan. Yes. Secretary of State was. He's actually.
How about I write up?
Yeah. Clinton talk.
Right.
And what time is it? Is it morning? They like it.
Thank you.
Breakfast lunch. Clinton talk. Take me to your shows.
Oh, I don't think it's that at all, because I have not seen too many lawmakers here on Capitol Hill who relish the fight and relish defending this president more than Mark Meadows. I don't think that it is too much for him at all. In fact, I think he may be gearing up to fight for this president in a different capacity. And so this is sort of the term limits argument plus. Yes, he was never intending to hang out here forever, but beyond that, there may be some interesting job opportunities in the not too distant future coming from the President of the United States that he would like to explore. You're welcome. Yep. Okay, yeah.
WMTA?
That's it. That's it.
President of Vermont. They can get fired.
Well, he did give us yes.
Brad, I'll call that more.
But I'm happy to help you.
Because when I went to get my Dodge school, I couldn't see the circle.
Oh, yeah. Like what I'm doing now? It's Corey? No, Dodge. Stands. It's
Because they still have to do
no problem. Everybody help Susie. Susie's your
Hey, it's Kevin. So I'm going to be feeding and pull the Republican because he's almost on his way out here. All right, just want to let you know.
It should be shipped out of the is going farther back than that. But I think you're more likely going to, I think more people want to toggle back and forth. So that, let's make another step to go back and
All right, I'm always.
You weren't in
it works. How's your kitchen?
I am hoping that when my vacation starts on Saturday that I will be able to put it on my backslash. But it just
All right, that's the one thing I don't want to hear.
You're yelling at me all day. I'm happy because otherwise
we have her full book.
It's a sore subject.
And I think the way that the right yeah, so I'm gonna update the story. I'm gonna add that in there. This is what's in it.
Yeah. Yep. Doing the cuts for his next question. 11:30. Is that event starts at around?
Nancy.
Yep. From 11:30 event, it'll be over by 12. Now, it was 12 o'clock. We could still do it.
You good, Gary? You good? 1 second. Thanks, man. Perfect.
You look like you've been out in the weather.
Yeah,
Corey, yeah, we'll just bring that, XLR and coax. All right. I might as well get that ready. I have nothing to do.
Susie, have you ever heard the cake version of this?
No, but I actually.
Yeah, Apple Music or anything? Unless you really want me to. Jim asked me to play it. Should I?
Just as long as you're the director for it.
Oh, okay.
I got my weed.
Yeah.
So, Kevin, what else?
Traditional Iowa
Traditional. Oh, you were talking about yeah, passed away. Yeah. I drove a 17-hour day yesterday. It was a great shot. I'm not going to stick my fingers in it. She's upset. Hates it when I.
Oh, at the end, in the red coat? I saw it.
That didn't come out right.
If you're looking for candy, I got a bag of candy.
Yeah. Is there a mic? No. Child molester. I got candy in my bag.
You looking for some candy?
I don't think it was. Yeah, it's weird. Yeah. I know this one. I'm sorry.
Susie Q.
Come and say hi.
Hi, Susie Q. Look at you. Hey.
Were you not working last night?
Yeah, I don't know.
Nobody told me.
I was walking out as he was coming in and was like, okay,
That's great.
miss it. Yeah.
This is going to be or no. You're trying to get over going into
Hey, that's not gonna work.
He doesn't understand I don't know what story is it.
For the first time.
Yeah, I am.
I mean, I literally turned and they wonder why we're going to
yeah, I think it's here.
Oh my gosh, you're the one
next for GPS, and they won't let you fly off the ground.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure.
Where's the last camera? Right there.
Thank you. The top.
Yeah.
That's good.
That's good.
I was joking. It sounds like Captain Well, we were having yes, on the floor. I looked at how
I didn't invent
it was green.
What? That crazy. It wasn't a crazy show. Really raunchy show. Jacket. Oh, that McCarthy. Yeah. He's lost it. He was sitting there. Now I just sitting there and his open man. So big like AOL, whatever, were here, and then like celebrities were down here. He just walked in there, sat down, and tried to find and it didn't work, you know. Yeah, was he all fat? Couple of 10 days. He was stiff as shit. That was a long time ago. He looks like a junkie now. He kind of is. Yeah. We patch here, you know, just take it from him. Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be
Now, this is going to be our last weekly press conference for the year and for the decade. So before we begin, if I don't get to see you, I want to wish you all a very, very Merry Christmas and a prosperous New Year. Being our last press conference, I guess we're going to start just where we started with our first one about a year ago, talking about impeachment. You watched what transformed last night on this floor. It's something that we've said all the time. The weakest, the thinnest, the fastest impeachment in U.S. history. Schumer even admitted, trying to ask for more witnesses, that what happened on this floor over here was wrong. Now we have the own Speaker of the House who is so embarrassed that she admits the failure of this impeachment that she will not even send it to the Senate. So embarrassed that I watched in her press conference she wouldn't even take your questions. That is not a good legacy to have. She's admitting defeat by not sending it, by refusing to send the impeachment over. She knows this outcome is not good. She knows the facts are not there. There's no basis for it. At the end of the day, the American public needs to move on. So with that, let me open it up for questions. Yes?
Since you brought up Nancy Pelosi's legacy, do you worry about your legacy, defending a man who suggested last night that John Dingell might be in hell, attacked a 16-year-old girl last week, said she has anger management problems? Is it difficult to defend a man who talks like this?
Your question to me is, am I worried about my legacy? No. Am I worried about my legacy of standing up for the Constitution that it is not impeachable what the president did? The question before me as a member of Congress, is that impeachable? Even, which I would consider probably the most respected constitutional scholar, someone who's not a Republican, a Democrat, Jonathan Turley even said, the only abuse that was moving forward was the Democrats, that there was no bribery, there was no obstruction, and that's the job that I have. Will I be embarrassed the fact that I just served for a year in Congress and the record of this Congress is more subpoenas than laws? I'm embarrassed that this is the Congress that did that. I'm embarrassed that this Congress promised to be different and they haven't. I'm embarrassed that this Congress designed their entire time, from selecting of their committee chairs, from the freshmen on their first day, to Adam Schiff, with only one goal of impeaching the president. When they moved to that impeachment, going against everything and every fear that Alexander Hamilton had, that the animosities would be so great that they'd use their own political raw power to do something different, and they did it, and now they're so embarrassed that they wouldn't send it over to the Senate? Yeah, I'm embarrassed about that. Yes.
You've had a record number of Republican retirements over this Congress and the
Yes.
last, including Mark Meadows today. What does that say to you about the health of your party?
Health of our party is very strong. Let's talk about that. Last Congress, when we had retirements, I was sad about that. I wish we didn't have as many. I wish Congressman Poe did not retire. I'd never met a man named Dan Crenshaw before, but this new, young Navy SEAL, who's now probably the strongest Republican on social media talking about policies and ideas. It's healthy. And for those who are afraid about Republican retirements, I would not be. If you take the average of the retirements based upon where, if you look at the president's votes and others, it's an R23. A Republican's going to replace Mark Meadows. I wish Mark Meadows would stay. He's been a great member. But from the same point of when you look back, the thing about the Republican Party, we don't believe this should be your entire life. Like, I watched Steny Hoyer, and he's a dear friend of mine, but he said in his speech the other day that he's been here 38 years. I don't think that's what our founders designed or thought of. And with the Republican Party, we're healthy, and we bring new blood in. And what's happening with a lot of retirements when you look across, and in 2010, I happened to be the recruitment chair. And remember, in 2010 is when Republicans defeated 63 Democrat incumbents. If you measure us today of where we are as a party on those who are running for office, we have more than 100 more than we had then. We have more women Republicans running for Congress than any time in the history of the Republican Party, from veterans and others. And so we're stronger than you and I. And if you sit today, I watched Speaker Pelosi said, what she had? She had a step in her, or a jump in her, swing in her step. That may be true because her conference is going to be a little lighter and a little smaller, and the Republicans is going to be stronger after today. So if you're asking me about the party and you're asking about retirements, Republicans are going to replace. I think the question of Speaker Pelosi, when she started this impeachment, she promised her own members that the public would be for it. Well, we found that not to be the case. She promised that they'd be stronger. They're going to be smaller. We're the stronger conference after it. I just don't find that any of this was healthy in any aspect that you measure it. It definitely is not healthy for our government, but it's definitely not healthy for America itself around the world. Yes?
Two-part question. If you could respond to an earlier question about can you defend Trump's remarks about the late John Dingell. But my question would be, this week federal prosecutors revealed that Lev Parnas, Giuliani's indicted associate, received $1 million, came up during his bail hearing. As you know, some of Lev Parnas's money was sent to your committee, you donated it. Can you respond to both the development in the SDNY prosecution, what that means for now the linking of Dmitry Firtash, the oligarch, to Parnas, and what that means for the investigation?
I don't know. The investigation will continue to go forward. I thought you were going to refer to, when you said what happened this week, I thought you were going to refer to the judge based upon what happened with the FISA court and the FBI spying on the campaign. That was a great concern to me as well. Question to John Dingell. I knew John Dingell, I knew Debbie Dingell. I served with them both. I think they were very good individuals. I think they served, John served his country very well, very proud. When John passed away, if you watched on the floor and you heard my speech on the floor, and contribute to him, and I find him very strong individual, very bright individual. I think he made a great contribution to America. We may differ philosophically and sometimes in principles, but no, I considered him a friend. Yes.
Now that the House has voted on articles of impeachment, what will House Republicans' role, in the Senate be? Are you planning on having some of your members prep the Senate as they prepare for an eventual trial, or what will that look like?
We will do anything senators need if they want information. If they need it, we have a lot of members that spend a lot of time on this. But that's up to the Senate and also up to the President who he wants to represent him. But anything that we can be helpful, we will. Yes, ma'am.
Last night's House Republicans defeat kind of a failure to the party?
A defeat. Well, let me first gauge that. I would feel it was a defeat to the Constitution. That the rise of impeachment would become so low that you didn't read the Constitution to take it. I'd consider it a defeat in the idea that we didn't hold the same standard that the Speaker asked us to hold in March of this year, at least at that time. That impeachment was so divisive that it'd have to be overwhelming, compelling, and bipartisan. When I watched last night, the only bipartisan vote was against impeachment. A Democrat who's actually running for president voted present. So the question you probably wanted to ask was to the Speaker. Unfortunately, she would not take any questions when it came to impeachment. I would think if Nancy Pelosi thought impeachment was so important that she had to put this before the American public, that she wrote a timeline, that she selected committee chairmen based upon in the future, that she spent 2.5 years working on this, the press conference the day after impeachment that she has weekly, I thought she would have welcomed questions about impeachment. Unfortunately, she told you they were Republican talking points and she would not take your questions. I never thought a speaker would act that way. I guess the only thing I could take from that, she's embarrassed of it. She understands how weak it is. And she understands her own criteria was not met, constitutionally was not met. She probably failed on all parts. I hope I answered your question. Yes, sir.
USMCA set passed today. The Speaker argued that Democrats deserve some credit for strengthening the product over time, for improving the enforcement mechanisms. Do you think that the final product that's going to pass is stronger than what initially came out? And how would you summarize the way that the negotiations have taken place over the last several months?
Well, you started by saying the Speaker believes the Democrats need some credit for bringing USMCA up. The only reason USMCA was brought up is because they impeached the president. So if she thinks the credit belongs for impeaching the president is why she brought USMCA up, I'll let her have that credit. But the credit for the bill itself, no. What did she talk about? Less than 1% of the overall bill. Now, I don't think it's better. It actually put doubt into some people of whether they would vote for it. USMCA talks about United States, Mexico, and Canada. Mexico is our #1 trader. Canada is #2. A lot of you have been reporting for the last year of our debate with China and trying to come to an agreement with China. China happens to be our #3 trader. If you were going to go into a negotiation with China, you'd want to be the strongest possible ability, right? So would you think passing USMCA a year ago when the president came to that agreement would make us a little stronger with our negotiations with China? Yeah, everybody in the world does. But Nancy Pelosi had the power as Speaker not to bring it up. Why? Because it didn't meet the timeline. She wrote a timeline of when she wanted to impeach the president in the last week that we are here. But she didn't want that to be the last vote. She had to have one other vote. So she held USMCA up, which only made our negotiations with China put us in a weaker position. So we got our first phase of agreement with China. We probably could have gotten it all if we were stronger with our first and second traders. So I don't know what credit she wants to take because she only harmed us by holding it. If she wants to try to spin it in some manner, with you're only negotiating 1% of the bill, I don't know how much credit you can take. America will be stronger because of USMCA. Presidents before have promised they would renegotiate this after 25 years. But only one president was able to accomplish it, President Trump. If you want to take, okay, let's look at the floor and let's see who should get the credit. Well, I took and I looked at every time the USMCA was brought up on the floor in the last year. You want to know what the percentages are? 91% of the time that USMCA was brought up to bring up to a bill and talked about was from the Republican side of the aisle. 9% from the Democrats. So I think history will tell who gets the credit. I'm just very proud of our members for never giving up, for continuing to put pressure. But the greatest pressure that finally changed the Speaker's mind was the impeachment, because she did not want to go home with that being the final vote. She's so embarrassed by it, she won't even send the papers over. She's so embarrassed by that, she won't even take your questions. Why will she release the papers? I never thought I'd see a Speaker take that position. But I guess that's where we live today. I never thought we'd see a House doing the things that Alexander Hamilton feared the most. Yes?
Have you spoken any more to Congressman Jeff Van Drew about him moving over to the Republican Party? And how do you feel about, welcoming a new member whose record doesn't exactly line up with Republicans?
Republicans are a very big tent. We're excited to have Jeff Van Drew. We welcome anybody who believes this new Democrat Socialist Party has left them behind. If you want to say what's welcoming, why is he leaving the Democratic Party? There's many times in the past that members from either side of the aisle have left their party to go to the other. But I can't remember a time that somebody left from a majority party to join the minority party. So that question that you raised to me and the premise of it really should be asked to the Democrats. How can you be excited if you started this whole process thinking the outcome would be better and your own conference got smaller because of it? It showed the differences. It shows you're not welcoming. It also shows you cannot have a difference of opinion. When you watched the body language on the floor last night, you watched those 31 Democrats who sat in seats that President carried. Their shoulders were down, their head was down. They were not proud of what they were in. It was almost like the pressure was too great for them. They felt the pressure inside the chambers from their own conference greater than the pressure of the constituents back home of who they said they would listen to. They've watched it inside their town halls and others. Many of them promised before they even got here that they would not vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker. They broke that promise right away. Because that promise of those 2.5 years to impeach the president was too great. Many of them would say that they did not want to impeach the president. That's not why they came here. But the chairman of the Committee of Impeachment, Judiciary, was selected based upon that fact. The congressman they selected to represent the 2 articles of impeachment inside the Rules Committee 2 days before the president was inaugurated, said he was going to impeach the president. The freshmen who now pretty much control the floor for the Democratic side, who gave them the majority, on the day of being sworn in, a few hours later, said they wanted to impeach the mother. So, I guess that much of pressure outweighed to these 31s their own constituents. But the difference is 11 months from now, the constituents will have a voice. For all the frustration I see, this is still the greatest form of government. Because the people have the power. Second question.
Yesterday was sandwiched in between 2 pretty bipartisan major votes this week, the spending bill, which had both bipartisan opposition and bipartisan support, and USMCA today. The Democrats say that shows that what they have said all along, that they can walk and chew gum at the same time, that they can hold the president accountable while also legislating. Do you think that it shows that there can be some bipartisan cooperation despite all of what has been hanging over Congress over the last several months?
There could be a lot of bipartisan support, but let's just take your question. We had bipartisan bills on the floor, a spending bill. When was the spending bill due? How many times did you have to do a continuing resolution before the pressure of Christmas coming, before the pressure of the troops not getting their pay raise? I don't think that's bipartisan. I think that's a failure in their job. Bipartisan, you become a new majority. You promise that you'll be different. They never passed a budget. Bipartisanship, we started at the very beginning, concerned about prescription drugs. So we had 3 bills that would lower the price of drugs, come out of Energy and Commerce, with every Republican and every Democrat voting for it. But there was one person that had the power to change the bill, not in committee, but sheerly by herself, the Speaker. She changed the bill before it came to the floor to make sure it wasn't bipartisan, to make sure it could not become law. USMCA, you say, is going to be bipartisan. It will. We've waited 1 year for it to come to the floor. Why? Why would they put them all this week? It's interesting, you even used the word sandwich. Could it be they had a timeline? Could it be that they waited for the impeachment? Could it be that they could not have the votes for USMCA unless they promised to impeach the president? Could it be those who sit in the districts that President Trump carried that wanted USMCA had to pledge a vote for impeachment to get USMCA come up? I don't know. That would be a question for the Speaker, but I guess she doesn't take your questions on certain subjects. It's only the ones that she wants to talk about. It's interesting for an elected official to have that answer.
Does the decision to not hand over the articles to the Senate right away, does that have any precedent, or does it raise any constitutional questions?
I don't think she has the constitutionality to keep them. To me, it's about admitting guilt. But then again, she just makes the rules up as she goes. Remember, we did not use the standards that we used for President Nixon or Clinton. She changed all that. We did not use the standards that the Constitution tells us about impeachment. We changed it for that. We did not use the standards that the Speaker laid out to us in March. She changed it after that. It's an embarrassment. And I don't think the American public will sit back and take it. Thank you for your time. I wish you all a very Merry Christmas.